Hello, I'm Monica Hingorani, and I'm the Learning Officer with Lat. I've got bells. There may be whistles later. So delighted to see so many people. We've got a few more people coming in. Please, you may need to grab a chair, but you're very welcome. What a terrific turnout for a Wednesday afternoon. People have already said to me they're so glad to be here. They're out of their offices. They've come out from the parks. They could have been kicking leaves around all afternoon, but we're here together. So welcome. I'll put my bells down, or they might get a bit annoying. So, welcome to the Leicester Ageing Together Learning Event, older people providing solutions. And certainly in the networking, I've heard from many older people about the solutions and the new ideas and the creativity. And it's really important that we carry on having these conversations. Somebody said to me, change isn't easy. And I think sometimes change can feel crab-like. So it feels like you're going along sideways instead of going forwards. But I think the conversations that we have this afternoon are really vital, and they're about older people providing solutions. So I'm going to hand over to Priya Tamotaram, who's the co-head of Highfield Centre. Wow, how lucky for us to have Highfield Centre for our event. And Priya's going to give us a welcome and also help us navigate our way around. Thanks, Priya.
Thank you, Monica. I'll echo Monica's welcome to you all. Hello. It's wonderful to host this event here. We've been a partner in the Leicester Ageing Together program now for the last 4 years. It's been a brilliant initiative in terms of providing a range of services for the older members of our community, that much neglected section of the community. And to be able to work with all the delivery partners in the Leicester Ageing Together program has been really fantastic. So looking forward to some really hearing about some of the brilliant learning that's happened and being able to take that forward. Because once we've generated that kind of interest in terms of the elderly being more active members of our community, more engaged, then we can't let them down by saying that this program is coming to an end in a few months' time. So we need to really focus on that part of the journey of how we can continue. In terms of the centre itself, just a few domestic arrangements. If you haven't discovered the toilets, they're along the corridor here to my right. There is no fire drill, so if the fire alarm goes, please make your way out of the exits and gather by the parade shops at the front. We're in the hall that has recently been remodeled through a major part exchange grant. It was a part of the building that did not benefit from the £5 million works that was completed back in 2004. And lots of people have been saying, Priya, this is something that can really be utilized for a range of different events, including film shows and theatrical productions, etc. It's also now linked to a sports hall. We can cut through into the sports hall, and that caters for attendance in excess of 300, 350. Events in this area tend to be at that level when it comes to social events. So people have been asking, why can't we use the sports hall? For the last 10 years since that £5 million project was completed. We've now got agreement from Sport England that it can be used at weekends for non-sports events, and we've got the funding to get that work done. The cafe too has been relocated from the first floor to the ground floor. Hopefully we'll be getting somebody in there soon to start that service. So there's lots happening here. And we're delighted that you've been able to find your way here. I know car parking is tricky out on those streets out here, But I hope you managed to get a space, and look forward to meeting you all throughout the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. Thanks, Priya, for that warm welcome. So, we've got programmes in our packs. I hope you've had a chance to have a look through. In a minute, I'm going to hand over to Rob Hunter, who you might spot isn't Ruth Rigby. Unfortunately, Ruth's poorly today, so isn't able to join us, but we're really delighted that Rob Hunter, our chair of Lat Board, is joining us. And then we've got a couple of speakers before we have our Lat Legacy Marketplace networking break. And those of you that arrived a bit earlier will have seen that there's masses of information, and there's some really friendly people at the stalls just near the tea and coffee area. So make sure that you do use that networking opportunity in the break. We're going to run straight through with the two speakers, and we're not necessarily going to break then for questions and answers, because we know that lots of you have got brilliant questions, but actually you've told us you prefer to ask those one-to-one or in small groups, and actually it can be a bit intimidating in a room this size to formulate your questions. We've got post-it notes on the table for you. This is about sharing learning, so it isn't about broadcasting necessarily. So feel free to ask questions of each other and of the speakers, but hopefully in a more friendly and accessible way in the marketplace. And then we've got two more speakers, and then we'll have chance for whole room questions and answers, and we'll ask all the speakers back. And all the speakers who've come from near and far, I'll introduce them in a minute, are all staying for the whole of the event. So we're really lucky to have them with us, and we're lucky that you've all come here today, because there's a lot of experience and energy and richness in the room. So I think Yolanta would have asked you whether you're happy to be filmed and photographed at the event, and so there'll be an indication if you're not. We're so delighted that Leap Studios are live streaming this, so hello to all our Facebook followers. I never thought I'd be saying that. If you're tweeting, you might want to tweet using hashtag Lat Learning. I know Priya's an avid tweeter, so we'll be reading all those tweets. You might want to ask questions via Twitter. That's another way that we can gather your views. So I'd really like to welcome Rob Hunter, Chair of Lat Board, who's going to just give you a whistle-stop tour of the legacy and sustainability work that we're involved in. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Monica. Yes, delighted to see people from a range of backgrounds. Our partners, older people, statutory colleagues, we're very pleased that our relationships with statutory colleagues have improved quite substantially over the last year, particularly since we've said we're not asking you for money to continue. But there's a lot of learning that we can share, yeah? And also, one or two of you from Aging Better programs. This, as you may know, is one of 14 Aging Better programs across the country. And some academics too, who are helping us reflect on the program and build our learning. So it's a great mix. And I think that's part of what we want to see and contribute to over the coming year, is developing a community of practice in this area of work with older people. Yeah? How do we help older people in Leicester flourish in their older age? We know that many older people, for many older people, it's the highlight, the best phase of their lives. But for a significant minority, about 25%, 30%, it's not. Poverty, physical disability, loss, and a marginalisation becoming invisible. And those are the people that we're particularly working with. And we're coming to the end of our programme now, and we're very pleased that Ruth Bamford and colleagues at the Big Lottery have supported us in focusing on legacy and sustainability. Yeah? And what we're trying to do, we've been having three years, we're only really a 4-year programme, 3 years of field work, which will continue up to the wire. Yeah? We're desperately trying to constantly learn from our practice and embed the things that are going well, but experiment with the things that we need to tweak. Yes, so that will continue absolutely fundamentally. But what we're trying to do is to strengthen and deepen our learning, really. And that learning comes at the level of the older person themselves. How do we support them to take charge, to learn from their experience of the work that they've done with us, and both develop themselves, take charge of themselves of the next phase of their life, plus also contribute collectively to community development and their peers. Yeah? So it's older people themselves, our own staff. How do we help our staff classify and learn from their experience? How do we help the organizations that they belong to do this collectively? How do we do that centrally in LAT? And how do we do that with statutory colleagues and, as I say, the other 14 Aging Better programs? So it's very much about rigorously squeezing our experience as we go along. Not stop now and just learn afterwards, but constantly learn from experience and develop. So our focus, yes, this year is on legacy and sustainability. In fact, our speakers this time are more external, if you like, to the fieldwork of LAT, which is part of the learning community, part of the community of practice. And Monica will now introduce them.
Thanks very much, Rob. And Rob talked about our strengthening relationship through LAT with public services. We're really delighted that Kate Hazar and her team have come today. Kate's the lead officer around the health and wellbeing strategy, and she's come today with colleagues, and so that I know they're going to be doing a bit of a group presentation, which is lovely. So Kate will be talking about the health and wellbeing strategy for the city and why we should all get involved in that. So welcome, Kate and colleagues.
Okay. Hello, everybody. So, as we've been introduced, we're from Leicester City Council Public Health, and my name's Andrea Thorne. And this is Kate Hazar, and we're leading on health and wellbeing in public health, and therefore we've come to talk to you today about the joint health and wellbeing strategy. So we're keen to develop this document in a collaborative way with key partners such as the voluntary and community sector who work directly within communities. This document is also looking to collaborate with the NHS and other organisations, and we're also wanting to engage with the public as well and make them aware of what this strategy consists of. So we're doing this to ensure that this strategy is useful and it addresses what matters to Leicester, and that the strategy adds value to our local area. So these are the areas that we're going to discuss in the presentation today, but I do want to make you aware before we start talking you through it that there'll be a link sent out to everyone in the room where you can read the draft of the strategy that we have so far, and so you can add in more detail your thoughts and comments around it. So it's very much a work in progress, so we thought we'd stress that at the beginning before we take you through it. So next, I guess, what is the health and wellbeing strategy for those that don't know? So the health and wellbeing strategy is the leading document for health within the city. And it's there to set health priorities which can help other organisations prioritise where they need to address health within the city. So it's a high-level strategic document, so we do have to have a sense of reality around it in terms of what we can actually input into the strategy. We can't address all local needs and all the inequalities within society, but we do want to set the priorities within it, and our way of delivering it will be through collaborative working, making the best use of assets that we already have and combining our knowledge and our expertise for joint working across the sectors to be able to drive this work forward and make an impact on health and wellbeing within the city. So it looks to inform and set direction for other strategic documents that might be developed throughout the city and ensure that health is woven into that. But it can also help support organisations to improve their health and wellbeing offer as well. So for the local authority, for example, this can mean providing more of a focal point to get into other services that we offer. So, for example, it's a way into being able to talk to housing and neighbourhoods, air quality, about their impact on health and well-being as well. And then beyond this, like I said, it's so we can work closely with the NHS partners, work with voluntary sectors, local schools and community organisations, and many, many more. Like I said, it's a high strategic document, and therefore we do have a big ambition, which is stated on the bottom right-hand corner there. We want to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to improve and maintain good physical and mental health. So it's important, if we go on to the next slide, so why do we need the health and wellbeing strategy? And this is really prominent when we look at the picture of health within Leicester. Some of you may be already aware of these stats, but if we look at life expectancy, it can really draw in your attention. So when we look at life expectancy, women are expected to live 77 years, and men are meant to live for 77 years, and women 81 years. But as you can see, we've broken this down. And the areas that are the years highlighted in yellow are the years lived in poor health. So that's 17 years for men and 22 years for women. And this is a significant amount of time for people to be living in poor health. So also on the bottom right-hand side, my right-hand side, we've got the main causes of death within Leicester. These conditions are responsible for the most premature deaths in the city, and this is deaths under 75. We also have an issue with multimorbidity. And multimorbidity is a term used when people suffer from 2 or more conditions, lifelong conditions. And this is becoming more prominent between the years of 19 and 44. And this will have a massive impact on that person's quality of life at that time, but also as they age as well. And this is also putting a lot of pressure on health and care services. So it's important that we have a way of moving forward and addressing these. We know that life choices and lifestyle behaviours contribute to some of these conditions. So here we're talking about physical activity, alcohol consumption, our diet, smoking. These are all things that we can make and adapt and improve our health. At the moment, these are responsible for 40% of deaths in England. So the strategy looks to address these factors, but we are also looking wider than just our lifestyle behaviours, and this is what this strategy does differently to the ones before. So we also know that deprivation is linked to health inequalities. 3 out of 4 residents live with 40% in the 40% most deprived areas nationally. People living in the most deprived areas in Leicester typically live 7 years less than those in the wealthy areas. And we also know that this cohort of people suffer significantly more with mental health issues and will engage in more of these unhealthy behaviours that we've just talked about. The strategy is looking wider than just the lifestyle behaviours. We're looking at what else impacts on a person's life, such as the environment and how easy and accessible is it to lead a healthy life. So this is where we've started. We move. So our starting point is to address 5 themes. We want to highlight these throughout the strategy and make sure all of them are considered in health and well-being. Oh. The picture shows our 5 themes, and in the diagram that we would have presented at the front, we've got healthy places based in the middle, and then we address mental health and the life course. So we know that we need to address all these areas. So when we're looking at healthy places, Thanks. When we're looking at healthy places, we're looking at making Leicester a healthy environment to live and to work in. And then we'll move on to healthy minds, and this is to ensure that mental health is considered in all aspects of the place and the life course. And then we go on to addressing the life course, so starting with Healthy Start. There we go. And we want to give Leicester's children the best start in life. We're looking at healthy lives. We want to encourage Leicester residents to adopt healthy behaviours that are sustainable throughout life. And then also we're looking at healthy ageing. We want to enable Leicester's residents to age comfortably and confidently. So also what this diagram represents is that these themes are all interlinked and have influence on each other in terms of health and well-being, so they're all important. And Kate's going to speak a little bit more in detail about each one. Do you want that?
Hi, right, I've just had the call to say we have less than 5 minutes left, so I'll talk quickly. It's okay, don't worry. Okay, so our first theme, as Andrea's just told you, is healthy places. And this theme to us, it considers more than just buildings. You tend to think places, you think of a building. But as Andrea pointed out, we're thinking of the wider environments when we talk about place. We're talking about where people live and work and the impact they have on a person's health. So do our environments hinder or aid good health? So as we know, the living and working conditions can have either a positive or negative impact on a person's health, and the environment we live in also affects the choices that we make. So for instance, we want to eat healthily, can we access healthy food? Are we able to do that where we are? It influences whether we smoke or drink, the pressures we have in our lives, those kind of things, and it's all to do with places. So this theme does focus on our spaces and places clearly as well, the standard of housing, the type of neighbourhood that we live in as well, and the public spaces that we have. Are they accessible? Is there local transport? What is the cultural offer like where we are? Do we have leisure centres, museums, libraries, community areas, open spaces that we can use that are safe, accessible, and that we can get to? Those sorts of things are what comes under healthy places for us. So we also consider, of course, sustainability as well, sustainable public transport, air quality and that type of thing falls under here, but also included in places are the non-physical things, your social places, the online places even. All of these things have an impact on individuals. So overall, a healthy place is one that promotes good health and well-being through as many means as possible for us. Okay, the next one that we have is healthy minds. Now, we all know how important positive mental health is. It affects everyone, and we know that typically it goes in families. If parents have poor mental health, then typically their children will often have it as well. So there's a clear association, as well as we know, between poor mental health and poor physical health. If a person has poor mental health, their physical health is also likely to be poor, and vice versa. And also, people that do have mental health problems tend to neglect themselves in various ways. So we have this correlation between the two. And also, into here as well, is social isolation, because people that have poor mental health are typically isolated and they become quite lonely. One of the main things we're calling for in a strategy regarding mental health is to tackle the stigma that's associated with it. So we're calling for parity of esteem, and so basically that mental health should be treated the same way as physical health, with the same level of importance. So social isolation and loneliness for us runs through all of these themes, but its place has to be in mental health. I'll just skip to Healthy Start. Thank you. Next one. Okay, Healthy Start. So we know that having Healthy Start is essential, and the behaviours that happen here set people up for life. So if we can instill in younger people healthy behaviours, how to make healthy choices, the importance of exercise and healthy eating, and actually create an environment where they can practice it, it actually helps as people get older, because the decisions that are made early in life impact health as people age. Next one, please. Thank you. Our healthy lives is just that. This part really is about encouraging people and enabling them to make the healthy choice. So we want people that have existing health conditions to manage their conditions well and to be as involved in their life as they possibly can be and to participate as much as they can. and to keep as well as possible. But it's also about encouraging everybody else to make healthy choices, to keep learning, to engage with their environment, and to making these choices now, again, impacts on health when people are older. So the choices we make at ages 40 affects our quality of life and how long we're likely to live. Our final theme is healthy ageing. Now, I need to tell everybody in here about ageing in Leicester, but we know we have an increasing older population. We know that people are living for longer, but as we have seen, they are often living for longer in poor health, which is not nice for the person, and it causes a drain on the systems as well. So this final theme is looking at how we can support people to age well, to age confidently and positively. This is about managing existing conditions as best we can, and to ensuring that people have the best quality of life possible, reducing social isolation and recognising difficulties that people experience, things such as being in a caring role, for example. Our aim here is to look at the valuable contributions that older people can and do make to society and create age-friendly environments for people to live in. So it's about more than reducing illness, it's about making people feel valued and helping them to be positively engaged with their communities. So in short, for us, we know that some of this good work goes on in this room, so it's about including some of that work into what we're doing. So there are a number of objectives that accompany our strategies, and I need to look at these now. As Andrea mentioned, a link will be sent to you, and you'll be able to look at these and the document in more detail and make comments. But these are the type of objectives that we're currently working with. So my final one is what we're asking for. So we're asking for you to contribute to the strategy. We'd like to know what you think and what your ideas are. This is very much a joint document, as we said in the beginning. So although there is a document now, it is a draft, so we are willing to change it, and we really do want your opinions. So just one final point is that we are very aware that we are writing this and trying to do it at a time of unprecedented financial pressures that are happening across all of the sectors. So we're all aware in here there is no money anywhere to do much or very, very little. So we have to have a degree of realism in what we can do and how we're going to do it. And we are very much looking at collaborative working around full use of assets, and also pooling expertise and knowledge as well, and using existing resources, and that's very much where we are, the point that we are coming from with the strategy. So please consider the questions that are there. There are some more when you actually log on, and the link will be sent around after. But finally, just thank you very much for allowing us to speak. We really appreciate it, and thank you for your time.
Thanks so much, Kate and colleagues, for that whistle-stop tour around the health and wellbeing strategy. So vital that the expertise and experience in this room is used in that strategy, and that you all get involved once we send you the link. So thank you so much. And Kate and team are going to be here in the networking session in just 20 minutes, so do hold your questions for them. Next, I'd like to welcome Gordon Grant, Emeritus Professor at Sheffield Hallam University, to come and speak and share findings from research into how Walking for Health groups help develop social capital. So just while Gordon sets up, I'll give you some background. He's a long-standing interest in marginalised groups, risks and resilience in their lives, and inclusion within the family and community, and he's published many books and papers in this field. We're really delighted that he's joining us here today. Thanks, Gordon.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm delighted to be amongst you for a little while. Walking and social capital. I actually retired for the first time about 10 years ago now, God help me, and my wife and I decided to move from Sheffield to Lincolnshire so we could be a bit more accessible to the rest of the family. So I'm now living in a little village that's kind of midway between Lincoln and Grantham. When we moved there 8 years ago now, within the first month or so, I inadvertently got drawn into helping to set up the Walking for Health group that I'm now going to talk to you about. But just before I get started properly, can I just ask for a show of hands from you about how many people are aware of the organisation Walking for Health? So quite a few of you. Okay, thank you. Right, next slide, please. I'll tell you a little bit about Walking for Health nationally, then about how our local group is organised, and then I'll say something most importantly about why the social capital elements of the walks are possibly the most important dimensions of all, besides the physical activity and health-related aspects that are connected to it. Next slide, please. Okay, so Walking for Health nationally is currently sponsored by the Ramblers, although it's a kind of separate arm that organises itself. And what the Ramblers do is promote it. There's a fantastic web page. That's the web page there. If you want to find out if there are local health walks in your area, go to that website and stick your postcode in, and it'll come up with a whole range of different schemes that you could join. The whole exercise is premised on the idea of encouraging older people, but not just older people, anybody really, to get out and walk regularly, safely, short walks, no more than an hour and a half, so it's doable within an afternoon, a morning, or an evening, with trained walk leaders. So these are people that get about a day's training on basic health and safety, that's it, roughly. And they recce the walks, so we go out and recce the walks the day before we actually do the walks, because conditions are always changing. You can just roll up. Membership is free, there's no charge, nothing. So it's completely open to everybody. Next slide, please. There is now absolutely undeniable evidence about the health benefits of walking either individually or in a group. That top line where it says good for health, there's been systematic review studies that show absolutely significant improvements in all of those clinical conditions. Okay, I'm not going to go through them because you can see them. The second line where it says improved physical functioning, we know from self-report studies that people commonly talk about feeling fitter, having more stamina, having improved mobility, and are better able to self-manage their health. And one of the ways that happens is, if you are doing regular walks and you're going up inclines and over stiles, you quickly notice how much more easy it might become to you. And people often say this when you talk to them. It's built into their stories. So it definitely works. And from evaluative studies, we know that walking is a protective factor for the main killers, the main things that kill people. So however frail you are, get up and try some walking. You can do it at home as well, of course, but it's even better if you can get outdoors and go with other people. And there is some evidence, although it's not quite as strong, but it's still growing, that doing stuff outside is better than doing the same stuff inside. So rather than sweat it out in a gym, go outside and do it with other people. Next slide, please. I live in a rural area now, and when you talk to people, they talk about this biophilia thesis, which is that people often feel better when they're immersed in nature. There's a kind of almost instinctive or biological thing where you think, oh, this feels nice. And people will often talk about their appreciation of natural beauty, discovering new places. When we set up the group, it was interesting that even people who'd lived in the area for 20, 30 years and longer were completely unaware of the network of public footpaths and bridleways in the area. So there's still stuff that we can all learn about our local communities just by going out and being guided safely around with your walk leaders. And then some places people will say, oh, yes, I remember that, or I had a special moment there years ago. So some spaces have special meaning for people, and they'll often draw attention to that when they're out and about. And it just makes people feel better. Next slide, please. So, our own group started in 2011 with about 6 or 7 people. There's now about 70 or 80 in the membership, but we have about 40 or 50 people turning up each week. Locally, the co-op is our county sponsor. Basically, they provide the training, but otherwise, the volunteer walk leaders like me do all the organising. We timetable, we recce the walks, and it's self-sustaining. The recruitment into the group is interesting. People come by word of mouth principally, or they notice posters. Virtually no one has come, and this is interesting for public health people, by direct referral from GPs. I'll just leave you thinking about that. We now have 14 walk leaders in our group, and we've split the group into two. These are a few members of our stroller group who walk a shorter distance, but in the same amount of time. So they walk more slowly and have more stops. And we've done that so that as the group has grown and the capacity of people has become more extreme, people who want to walk fast, people who want to walk more slowly, we can cater for both. Our oldest walker is the lady in the middle, the shorter lady in the dark top there. She's 92, and she's one of the fastest, fittest walkers that we've got. I'm going to be saying something in a minute about social capital, and it's important to bear in mind that the walks really are split into three. There's the briefing, the walk, and then there's the cup of coffee that comes later. And those are all vital elements. Next slide, please. When people arrive, they sign in, because we need to keep tabs on who's walking. People need to know where they're going and what the hazards are. That's the main function. Next slide, please. People can bring their dogs, as long as they're on a lead. They've not brought cats or ferrets yet, but you never know, that might be around the corner. Next slide, please. So, social capital. A simple definition is the social networks and trust and reciprocity they inspire. It doesn't happen by spontaneous combustion. There have to be opportunities for people to meet and greet on a regular basis. Next slide, please. I'll just skip over this really, but because I'm an old academic, used to do social science research, I kind of rubbed shoulders with people and interviewed them after I got their permission to do so and collected stories about why they joined the group, why they kept coming back for more, and how they benefited. So I'll now say something about the social capital side of it. Next slide, please. It's interesting, when people first meet up, it's like now a community of friends coming together. There's a buzz. That's not my term, it's theirs, when they meet up. There's lots of non-verbal stuff. Hugging, kissing, embracing. It crosses genders, which is nice, and it crosses age. People get a briefing from the walk leaders so they feel safe about where they're going. They know that they're going to be led, so they don't have to think about where they're going, even when you're on the walk, because you're being guided along. So the element of trust is built, even without us thinking about it. In terms of the walk, it's very interesting. Walks are not linear things when you're walking as a group. You come to a road, or a stile, or a hazard, or somebody trips up, and there's somebody there. You change, the pattern of associating changes almost all the time. So you are finding out about new people that are less familiar to you in the group all the time that you're walking. You learn a heck of a lot, not just about other people, but what makes them tick, because they'll tell you all sorts of stuff. You find out all sorts as well about what's going on in their communities of interest. It's also okay to talk to people about anything that you like. In fact, several people talk about the emancipatory qualities of this, just ordinary talk. Some people like to be more silent and quiet and walk contemplatively. or even to meditate. And that's fine as well. It doesn't seem to matter. And people help each other out. So there's mutual assistance going on as well if people are stumbling or tripping up. We get back to what we call a pavilion, where out of the blue, 3 ladies in the village offered to make us tea and coffee. There's a charge of £1 for as much tea and coffee as you can drink, and biscuits. When we meet in the pavilion, the dynamics change again. There's information exchange. People get up and talk about different initiatives that are taking place in the community that are out with the group. There's fundraising things that happen. So the group becomes a kind of bridging element to other interests in the community. And through even the humble donations that we make for the coffee fund, with 40 people or 50 people turning up each week, and we're walking every week, that raises £2,000 plus per year for the playing field committee. So there's economic capital that's produced for the community. Next slide, please. I'm going to hurry along here. This is just another way of cutting and pasting what I've just said. The group is a community of friends. It generates active caregiving, not just during the walks, but outside of the walks as well. If somebody doesn't turn up for a walk unexpectedly, somebody will generally pop round and see if they're okay. It's that kind of community. There's all sorts of direct action and physical assistance that takes place, information exchange I've explained. For some people who are perhaps living by themselves, it helps them to keep their diaries full. People who've been bereaved or who have some mental health problems, it makes them feel more involved in the community. And I could give you all sorts of stories about that. And in terms of community building, I haven't got the time to tell you the heaps of stories there are about that, where people go out of their way to help people to engage wider communities of interest. Okay, next slide. They say a picture tells 1,000 words. This is some of us in the pavilion at the end of the talk. And it's just, all I can say, it's a hub of activity. It's a refuge from the elements, and it's a great way to end the walk. In fact, if you remove that element from it, and we all got back from our walk and just dispersed, it would not be the same, which has led some people to say that the walk is merely the preamble before the coffee morning. It's all important. My penultimate slide. Sorry if I'm overrunning a little bit. So why are the social capital outcomes important? Well, I think there are 3 levels. At the personal level, there's evidence that it helps to enhance people's quality of life. There are theories about people wanting to live in the moment, to have that sense of belonging, and to feel that they can develop and grow. The walking group helps all of those. And of course, those are things that are mediated by chance as well as by choice. It helps people to feel more resilient, that they can do things, and to develop that sense of personal agency. And it's also linked to notions of successful aging, I would suggest, because it helps people to contribute, to be part of the community. Organisationally, and this is really a key thing, without the social capital element to the walks, people would not come back for more. That is the absolute key to its sustainability. And I would suggest for people planning physical activity programs of any kind, if people do not enjoy it, a GP prescribing gym classes for someone, if they do not enjoy it, they will not carry on. And finally, if you want any more information from me, there's a couple of published papers of which I've got copies with me. Thank you very much.
Next, I'd like to welcome, please, Rachel Monahan, who's the Innovation and Change Officer at the Centre for Better Ageing. Have I said that right? Monahan. Rachel Monahan, who comes from a background of developing and delivering projects across the health, environmental and youth sectors. And before joining the Centre for Better Ageing in February 2018, Rachel worked on a big lottery-funded project in the London Borough of Islington, supporting communities to take action to improve their health and well-being. Thank you very much.
Hi, thank you very much for that introduction, Monica. So as she said, I'm Rachel and I work at the Centre for Ageing Better. And what I want to do today is very briefly introduce you to the work that we've been doing recently alongside, in partnership with the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. I won't say that again, it takes half an hour. Okay, so what we've done is a lot of work which has now been put into a review of supporting communities in later life. So, the Centre for Ageing Better is a charity that's funded by the Big Lottery Fund. We have an endowment. Our vision is a society where everyone enjoys a good later life, and our aim is to make sustainable long-term changes in society that will make a real difference to people's later lives. So our work on community contributions is one strand in one of our priority goals, and that priority goal is connected communities. So the review on community contributions in later life that we've been carrying out is going to be published in 2 weeks. So I'm going to give you a sneak preview of what I can tell you at the moment. The remit of the review is to consider how to enable more people to contribute their skills, time and knowledge to their communities in later life. And we call later life, for this purpose, over 50. And it's a focus on how to increase participation among underrepresented groups. And the aim of the review is to deliver practical recommendations that will inform the work of government, of funders, and of organisations like all of us. And it looked at all different kinds of volunteering. So, can we go to the next slide? And I'll tell you what we did. So, we did a review of the existing evidence of the benefits of community contributions to people. We did a call for evidence and a call for practice and got loads of fantastic information, loads of fantastic examples from people. We held 7 roundtable meetings and had over 100 participants who gave their time and gave their expertise and knowledge. We held focus groups with people in later life. Some of them were for them to give their experiences, others to give their views on some of the emerging findings from the work that we were doing. And we also commissioned some qualitative research in 4 localities, so in Bristol, Leeds, Settle and Scarborough. And that was particularly to help us to understand patterns of informal contribution in later life, something that we don't really know as much about. So next slide, thanks. So what do we mean by community contributions? Well, for the purpose of the review, it means the really wide range of ways that people help out, get involved, volunteer and participate in their communities. So this is a kind of visible demonstration of what that whole range is. So it ranges from sort of civic engagement, things like being a councillor, being a school governor, to formal volunteering with more formal organisations, right the way through to neighbourliness and, you know, popping round for a cup of tea, helping someone out when they need something. We know a lot more about the right-hand side, so what people do, who does it, how much time they give. But the review was trying to look right the way across. So it's looking more at what people do in terms of helping out their neighbours, being connected into their communities right on their doorsteps. Next slide. So what do we know now? We know that making a contribution in later life is good for us. I think this reflects what Gordon said just before the break. It increases our quality and quantity of social connections, it enhances a sense of purpose and self-esteem, and it improves life satisfaction, happiness and well-being. We also know that health and socio-economic status actually determine whether people are involved in their communities more than their age. And evidence also shows there's a small but consistent gap in the rates of contribution by people from black and minority ethnic groups. Just want to caveat that with the brackets saying that that's informal situations. Again, we know less about informal situations, but our research that we've done indicates that in more informal settings, there's a wider range of people involved. Okay. So we know that also that many people who could benefit most are currently missing out. We know that the challenge for people in later life is to keep them involved. So lots of initiatives to get young people involved in their communities or volunteering is about getting them started. The challenge here is more for keeping people involved. We know that people face barriers that stop them from contributing. I'll talk a bit more about that later. And we also know that life events and transitions can affect people's ability to contribute. So things like diagnosis of a long-term condition, bereavement, moving house, and stuff like that. So those have been identified as trigger points where people might lose their social connections, and that can lead to loneliness. But they can also act as an anchor. They can also help people when things are changing around them to have that connection into their local community. If they can keep that going, that can really be an anchor. So, I mentioned before, less is known about informal contributions. So we commissioned a piece of research to give us a better understanding about what those might be. So here's a quote from one of our research participants. If you can do something, you do. You don't ask yourself, shall I help? You just do something. Thanks. So our research painted a really rich picture of the ways that people gave or received support. Some people were really highly involved in groups and they were self-identified as volunteers. But lots of people didn't think of themselves as contributing at all. And some of our community researchers who worked on this project really had a job to tease out of people what it was they did and how they supported, helped, were involved with their local community and local neighbours. They didn't see themselves as doing something. You know, you just do something. They did it. They didn't think what it was. So people did some things that were sort of low-level responsibilities, so looking in on neighbours, taking the bins out, taking people's parcels in, doing the shopping, things like that. But they also had other things that people did which had deeper relationships of trust, so looking after people's children and even moving into areas of some personal care, so helping a neighbour to wash their hair. These are just some examples. Thanks. So our research participants also talked a lot about what made them want to do these things. Another quote here, I get a sense of community, especially when it's right next door. Belonging, it's friendship. So we found common themes in the different areas of where we did the research. They played out differently, of course, but some of the things that people talked about is wanting to give back or be a good neighbour. They talked about how long-standing contact, friendships and shared experience really helped them to feel able to get involved. People talked about faith. In all of the areas, faith was a really important thing. It helped to provide a moral framework. It shaped community norms, expectations and what people were going to do. And people talked a lot about how regular and consistent and frequent, so, weekly or more than weekly, social contact was very important. That sort of social contact they got through places of worship. People, we call it reciprocity. We put this term to people in a focus group in Stockport, and they shouted it down. What it means is people giving their time and feeling able to receive help. So giving help and receiving help as well, and having that permission to do so. That was something that people talked a lot about. And finally, as an example, is the people talked about the desire to stay active and engaged, and people even sort of articulated how they understood that being involved was supportive of their own well-being, their own sense of purpose. Across all aspects of the review, all the things that we did, we talked a lot about barriers and what stops people from getting involved. And we have broadly split these into 3 different types. So there's practical barriers, so things like transport, either transport costs, transport not being available, public transport making it absolutely impossible for people to get where they want to be, when they want to be. Also problems of access, which become more acute for more people as they get older. And also time, people being really pressed, people having other commitments. The next type of barrier was structural barriers. Those sort of barriers often perhaps unwittingly created or developed as part of what organisations or groups are trying to do for people. So that's things like inflexible offers, not being able to accommodate people who want to drop in and do something without too much commitment. A lack of resources, both a lack of money or also the lack of time and ability to do the things that you want to do. And people also talked a lot, of course, about bureaucracy, things like long application processes, DBS checks and things like that. That was a real barrier for people to be involved. And I was talking earlier before with Jason, the Friendly Bench, the barrier that they had in getting permission from the local planning department, I guess, to put their bench where they wanted it to. Without those sort of ability to negotiate that kind of democracy, that can be a barrier that just stops things. And the third type of barrier that we identified was emotional barriers, and this was talked about absolutely loads by everybody. And it seems to be something that's particularly keenly felt by people when they want to be involved in their communities in later life. So it includes things like a lack of confidence, a feeling of stigma or stereotype. They're, an old volunteer, they've got nothing to offer, they're not going to do anything to help. Okay. So very few of these barriers are specific to older people. Older people, though, told us that they don't want opportunities to be segregated. They don't want opportunities to be age-specific. So what they were calling for, and what we have worked into a series of 6 principles, is opportunities that are age-friendly and inclusive. So this can support people in later life to engage and to stay engaged with their communities. So there's 6 principles. I'll just go through them very quickly. We've got the idea that opportunities should be flexible and responsive. I don't know, I'm sure a lot of you know about Trussell Trust, who run food banks across the country. One of the things that they're doing is to be more flexible, is to chunk down what they ask people to do into tasks rather than roles. So people can turn up, they know what they're doing, they're being asked to carry boxes from A to B for 2 hours, they're being asked to pack a bag for 2 hours. So people don't have to commit to once a week, they don't have to commit to 6 months of contribution or anything like that. They know exactly what they're being asked to do, and they can start to do it the minute they turn up. So when people are most motivated is when they first appear. So if you can get people to do that, be responsive to their enthusiasm, that can be really helpful. The next principle is that people should feel enabled and supported. as part of the review, we talked to an organisation called Step Together that works with people who face social exclusion, and they give intensive support to ex-offenders to get volunteering opportunities. They help people with all the practical barriers that they might face, with ID checks, with getting to a place to talk about an opportunity. But most importantly, they help people to feel enabled by giving them support with the emotional barriers that they might feel. They're able to give them time, they're able to listen, and they're able to be sort of persistent with people to get them to do the things that they're wanting to do. The third one, sociable and connected. I mean, everybody who's in the pavilion, it seems like you're doing absolutely fantastic work to make things sociable and connected for people. Hearing about the coffee after the walk is really important, giving people opportunity to sit down, spend time together, and be connected in all sorts of different ways, in ways that people want to be connected as well. The fourth one, valued and appreciated. I mean, I always think this sounds like it should be absolutely a given, but it's there as a principle, and it reminds me of somebody I used to work with, Prem in Finsbury Park again. She was the volunteer receptionist in her community, her local community centre. She worked for years and years on reception, and the community centre manager never acknowledged that she was doing anything, never thanked her. She was so committed to her local area that she still carried on doing it, but I always used to think if she had actually been thanked, she would have taken that thanks, taken that feeling of value and appreciation out into other parts of her life as well. Good for Prem, she's still doing it though. I'm not sure about the community centre manager, he might still be there. The fifth one is meaningful and purposeful. So that's where people are, the people who are involved are the people who are in charge. In Ageing Better in Camden, there's a group of people called Kilburn Older Voices Exchange. I don't know if anyone's ever come across them. It's a little bit of a nod. Yes, they decide what they want to work on. Recently, I think they've been doing work about safety and crossings, making sure that people have enough time to cross the road. So they're in charge of what they're doing. They know who they want to approach. They've had contact with the Department for Transport to get things changed. So that for them, there's meaning and purpose in what they're doing. And the final one, the final principle, is having opportunities that make good use of my strengths. So we did, part of our research we did was in Leeds, and it's really sort of gratifying to know that the finding from that research has been used to get funding to do pilot work in 3 local areas to stimulate acts of neighbourliness. So the idea is that they'll be using the strengths that people have, the experiences that they've had from being part of the research to really get local contacts working again, and also to try to make links between more formal and informal groups to ensure that everybody in those local areas who wants to be involved is able to be involved. So the review that I've been talking about is coming out in 2 weeks. Woo! Exciting. I hope you'll take the chance to read it. It's also going to include a set of sets of recommendations. So recommendations for central government, for local government, for voluntary sector organisations, for businesses, for small community groups. So there should be, things that we can think of, all of us can think about, things that everyone can do. But there's also, hopefully, a bit of a lever that people can use to ask for things that they need to change so that they can support people. Okay, finally, at the Centre for Ageing Better, we've got a new strategy that's recently been launched. I've got some copies of it if you would be interested to see it, and I've also got some cards which are a very, very shortened version of the strategy if you don't have time to read 40 pages or something. I've also got some information about becoming an age-friendly community, and I've got a message from Ange, our age-friendly network manager at the Centre for Ageing Better. She'd be really delighted to come and talk to you more about what you're doing and also how she can support your legacy work. So, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Rachel, and we're really sorry the technology gave up, but we didn't give up and we really enjoyed your input and there was a lot of richness. I'm going to give Sarah a minute, I think, to go back to the main presentation before we invite our final speaker, who's last but not least. There were just a couple of things in Rachel's rich input about the research that I wanted to make sure that you'd picked up. One was the idea of reciprocity, which I really like as a word, but I think we like give and take a bit more, and I just wanted to ask Emily to give you a wave, and she'll be too shy and she'll hate me for asking, but Emily is really lovely and she works for Give and Take, so I hope you've had a chance to meet her in our pavilion. And then I wanted to say thank you to Ageing Better Camden for coming up. And they're one of a network of us around the country, Ageing Better programmes. So thank you for everyone who's come, and particularly those who've come from further afield. And we hope you love Leicester as much as we do. So thank you, and I hope you've had a chance to network with people from the same places and different places today. And then finally, I wanted to say how interesting the lead on transport as a barrier, and how delighted we are to have Robin Poynton come as our final speaker today. And then honestly, it will be your chance to speak. So while Robin comes up, while I invite him up, I'll just let you know that Robin Poynton is the founder and managing director of Go Travel Solutions, a specialist sustainable transport consultancy which promotes and develops sustainable travel solutions for communities and businesses. Go Travel is a 10-year-old social enterprise based in Leicester. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you very much. Oh, we need some technical assistance over there. We're stuck. Anyway, I'll give you a little bit of background, and the slides, I say, are not the most exciting slides, so let's crack on. In the summer, I was asked by Leicester Ageing Together to look at transport being a barrier. And I suppose I'd like just to do a bit of audience participation at this point. Okay, so with that subject heading of transport as a barrier, you've got a chance to basically make a vote here, okay? And thinking about your networks, and particularly for the elderly community, you've got 4 options here around transport. You can either say it is a barrier in terms of as a big barrier, it's often a barrier, sometimes a barrier, never a barrier. So 4 options, okay, and just do a sort of as a straw poll just to get the sort of the temperature of the room. So if you think really transport as a barrier for elderly people is big, hands up please. Who's going for big? All right, so that's roughly about half the room. Who's going for often a barrier? Okay. Anybody going for sometimes a barrier? Sometimes. And anybody going for never a barrier? Okay. Well, that's probably partly the reason why we're asked to do this piece of work, because, I say, the majority of you out there is that the transport is a barrier. And it looks like the IT is a bit of a barrier at the minute as well. We seem to be going backwards. But let's crack on. So the task that we were asked to do, was to look at really working with the local partners, the Leicester Ageing Together partners, and look at really where is the need at the moment. We often talk about it, don't we, as transport as a barrier. We sometimes, perhaps often, actually don't get much beyond that and to actually get under the skin. So the purpose of this project was to get under the skin of that and then suggest some possible solutions. How could we make a difference there? So that's the task that we were given over this period. I don't know if we're back. Oh, looks like we're live. Thank you. So the key tasks in the project were those 3 things really: to look at those, look at the need, gather intelligence and ways that we could make some adjustments and improvements around that area, and then recommend some next steps. Move on, please. We can skip that one. You know all that already. So in terms of the methodology, how we went about this piece of work. there are kind of 4 different elements to this. We engaged with programme partners, some of which are here today, so I spoke with them, and we also did a survey with them as well. We then met with a number of the groups themselves and talked to them and really had a conversation and really asked them, really, how does transport work or doesn't work for them? We also then engaged with some of the local transport stakeholders. So we spoke with the City Council. You've perhaps seen, many of you, the yellow vehicles going around, up to about 70 of them, doing various activities. Spoke with them and their vehicles. And we also then spoke with a number of the programmes, the Ageing Better programmes across the UK, England, and 5 of those programmes. So, what did we find? So, what we found really that the barriers, the challenges around transport really fall into 3 areas. And these 3 areas, as I say, aren't separate areas. They, in many ways, interact and, interact with each other. The 3 areas really, first area is really around the individual and the individual's ability, you know, in terms of where they've got their physical capacity, mental capacity, their income. But that has a major bearing on what opportunities that they can access around transport and travel. The second area is around the information, the provision of information, the access to information, and particularly with the elderly community, so much of information now is going more online, and that for many people in the elderly community can be more challenging. And the third aspect is around the infrastructure. And by infrastructure, what we're thinking here, it's about the nuts and the bolts of transport. It's about the footpaths, it's about the bus services, it's about accessible minibuses, all those different elements that form part of the infrastructure. And as I said earlier, these things aren't totally separate, and you can probably understand why. Yes, the individual, you know, may have some physical disabilities, and that in turn will limit what they can use in terms of infrastructure. So the vehicles that they can use will be limited by their capacity. The capacity also might be limited by their income. So some options will be available for some people that have more disposable income in terms of transport than other options, like maybe a taxi. So if we move on to then some of the key findings. You can go back one, please, Sarah. So, transport, it's often, isn't it? It's so often used as a label. It's a barrier. And we kind of wanted to kind of challenge that a little bit. And it is definitely a barrier. But sometimes it is more perceived than real. But at the end of the day, perceptions are the reality for people. But we sometimes think it can be so easy as a label just to place it out there. And the important thing really is to understand it and say, well, what are the things that we could do to make a difference? Well, not surprisingly, we didn't come away from the piece of work with the answer, the golden answer to all these things. There is no silver bullet. And what we'll come to shortly is a number of different suggestions and ideas about ways that we can actually make a difference here. We also want to almost flip it on its head as well. We heard earlier from Gordon about walking and the benefits of walking. There are many ways that transport and travel actually can be an opportunity. We spoke with some of the group up in Belgrave, the Anything Goes groups, which is run by Age UK. And we're saying to them, just said to them, okay, here are some options around travel. And one of the things we said to them, what about electric bikes? 2 or 3 people in the group put their hands up and said, yeah, I'll be up for that. Now, okay, it needs training, it needs support, but ordinarily we perhaps wouldn't assume that actually that sort of option around travel would be possible or be, maybe of interest. But actually, just think of the opportunities that could present to people by doing those sorts of things and having that form of travel as well. So we've got to think about ways that we can make travel actually part of the experience and not just be seen as being this issue that has to be sorted, because it has so many other health benefits on the back of it. In terms of funding, we've heard, and we know very well, don't we, in terms of the funding landscape, it is challenging, and generally that funding is getting less. But there are things that can be done It's not all about the funding. There are things that can be done, we believe, which actually can help us get more bang for the bucks, as it were. And also, one of the things often any group will often look towards is thinking that actually the answer to what we need is an accessible minibus, and every group needs an accessible minibus. There are examples, I'd say, elsewhere in the country. Stoneleigh is up in Sheffield, where they themselves say they used to have a minibus, and they don't now. Life has gone on. They have found other ways of undertaking the travel and transport aspects for that group. And in many ways, they found it liberating as well. Now, that's not an easy step to take, we understand that, but sometimes actually it may not be quite the barrier that we perceive it to be. One of the other things, and this is not at all a criticism of how the programme works at all, it's typical across the whole country from speaking with other groups. Transport and travel is often a delegated responsibility to the programme partners themselves. And we would just sort of want to question that, well, is that always best for all aspects of that? Because we're asking, programme partners, the individuals there, to become the master of all sorts of disciplines. And we're saying, well, actually, is there actually a different model that could be evolved here, which could help make sure that they're not actually expected to do everything here? One of the areas that we found was around information. There is a real gap of information. You only know what you know, don't you? And you don't know what you don't know. So people will perceive, quite naturally, what they know is kind of the full circle of information that is available. When you actually start sort of getting under the skin of that, you actually start to realise actually there are some big gaps of information. So the example of Access Bus in Leicester, when we spoke to the groups and programme partners about the Access Bus, virtually universally they weren't aware. And this is a group of people that in so many ways would benefit from use of that service. So that is just an example of information, and within the report that we've done, we've gathered lots of information out there about all sorts of range of information, whether it's from concessionary fares through to grants and support that's available. That we're looking forward to that and putting that back to the groups themselves and participants to help them really to give some practical information out there. But this information is just so spread all over the place that, as I say, it's almost impossible for individual groups and individual participants to benefit from that information. In terms of when we looked at the situation, you compared Leicester versus the other, basically the other projects around the country. So we spoke with 5 other projects. Everybody in some ways is struggling in different ways with the travel and transport piece. We're not unique. And I suppose no great surprise, I was hoping that out there somebody might have sorted it, but, well, you might not be too surprised to hear, no, nobody's really kind of sorted this one. There's all sorts of examples of, good practice and different experiences. And the shades of the story change from different places. If it's a metropolitan area and an urban area, some of the challenges around transport are quite different to a rural area. But transport remains a pretty consistent issue and challenge around programmes. Another aspect also that we found really from the findings really was sometimes, often when venues have looked at, we're sometimes perhaps a bit blind to look at, well, how do people actually travel there? Yes, I mean, if there is an accessible minibus, that in some ways probably helps, but we've got to kind of liberate ourselves a little bit to thinking, well, just thinking about in terms of walking and using the local bus, how accessible are those to the centre that we're using, and what services are actually serving into and feeding that location as well. So one of the things that we kind of came to the conclusion really out of this is that I think we certainly believe there's an opportunity for change here, an opportunity to make a difference going forward. There are examples, and this is consistent throughout the country, where resources are being duplicated. If you're from Leicester, you'll perhaps be aware of seeing many yellow vehicles, but those yellow vehicles aren't used intensely all the day, and we're having had some conversations about is there ways of knitting things together more effectively in terms of those resources. And also, one of the other aspects as well is that we recognise that there is a lack of that sort of expertise. We can't expect project partners to be the master of all things and the experts in all areas. So is there a way of actually looking at that transport expertise being gathered in different ways? And we've got this changing landscape of commissioning and also the funding as well happening. So that in itself represents an opportunity to think, actually, how do we make this work and make those resources work better for us? And we also found that there is, a real appetite also. There's an appetite out there from the programme partners to have that conversations and have that discussion around the opportunity that there is to change there. So in terms of some considerations for the future, these are the things that we're in discussions with the board of Leicester Aging Together. Some areas, and I say there is no silver bullet here, but it's about a range of different things that could be done. There is a kind of an opportunity there to sort of enhance the information that goes to individuals, help them to actually plan their journey, and not always assume that the answer has to be an accessible minibus in that to do that. We've already got established the give and take, and to say that as an opportunity for volunteers to build on that and to feed them in. So, looking at not just only, thinking about car drivers, but whether it's bus buddies, people to accompany people, because we found some of the feedback, sort of the feedback was reflecting many ways. It's about, there's a sense of loneliness and the wanting mental health support in these areas. I think opportunity there around venue support as well. We mentioned there about helping to identify locations and how those locations could work for in terms of travel and local travel opportunities. And opportunities also around really the advocacy role of age-friendly transport. Some good examples around the country where that's been worked with, bus companies, and the bus drivers themselves have actually taken on board training specific to really understand, some of the particular aspects of customer care in that area. And also, final consideration really is around building on the specialised transport. We've had a bit of an initial conversation with Age UK just about thinking they've got, already an established vehicle fleet of minibuses. So let's find ways in the future of actually using that and not looking for duplicated resources. We haven't got the funding to allow for that. So we've got to be smarter in how we do things going forward. So finally, next steps really is about, so we fed back to the Leicester Aging Together board on Monday. We're looking at an action plan to be put together based on these findings. And hopefully then that's be something that is certainly, as part of the programme now and as part of the legacy afterwards, we can really feed in and help to make a difference in this area, both for the programme partners themselves, but the individuals crucially as well. Thank you.
I suggest we take 3 questions from the floor and we pose them to our panel members, and I'll hand this mic over in a minute. So has anyone got burning questions or comments that they'd like to share with our panel? We would ask you to speak into the mic, so we'll bring that round so that our distant audience on Facebook... Brilliant, thank you. Will you say your name and where you're from and then your question?
Hello, I'm Lydia from Aging Better in Camden. My question was for Gordon. We do a lot of thinking about working with older men in Camden because we find that lots of our groups are mainly women. And I wondered what the split was like on your walking group and if you had kind of any ideas around that. I found it a really fascinating talk, so thank you.
Thank you very much, Lydia. And another question? So the first on inclusivity in walking groups and gender. Thanks, Berta.
It's both an observation and a question. I think a lot of the issues that have been discussed would relate to any marginalised group. I just wonder what the panel feel are the particular strengths of the older people in the community.
Another brilliant question. I hope that's prompting you all to think about. Another question, and then we'll go to our panel.
Hi, I'm Jan from the WEA, and I was just thinking about the Leicester Health and Wellbeing Strategy, and I think it's absolutely great that there is one, that there's going to be one, and that it will be shared. But I'd like some sort of reassurance about how it will be, how it will make a difference to things like planning and the other departments within the City Council and in health, to make sure that things really do get better on the health and wellbeing front.
Thank you, Jan. So if we go to Gordon first.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. The gender split in our group, and I'm told this is not typical of most Walking for Health groups, is about 60-40 women to men, which basically means that we have quite a lot more men walking in our group than most health walk groups. That may just be a function of the locality, I don't know. What I can tell you is that I know every single person in our group, and because I interviewed most of them to do my study, I know lots about what motivated them to walk and how they came to join the group. Quite a few of the men have partners in the group. They don't necessarily walk with them. In fact, mostly they don't. There are some men who are living by themselves. Some have never married. Some are bereaved. Some are separated. Interestingly, some of the men came because they felt there was little for them to do in the community. And they would often say there's much more for women to do locally in the WI, aerobics, yoga. Well, men aren't excluded from those, but they tend to be the preserve of more women than men. So walking was seen to be something that was more neutral. With one guy that was bereaved some years previous, he did most of his stuff with his wife. And when she died, he stopped doing that. And he became very isolated. Until one day a colleague said, well, have you heard about the walking group? Why don't you come along? And he was quite depressed at this point. He came along and it transformed his life. That's not my words, that's his words. That's how he expressed it to me. And in fact, another example of the community building which grew out of this, another guy in the group who became very conscious that there were quite a lot of single, isolated men in the community, started up a group in response to that. So this came out through our walking group. Started up a local group called Clogs, which is the Caythorpe League of Gentlemen, which I'm happy to say I'm also now a member of this. And it's us blokes, we meet every month and we do daft things. Or things that are interest. You know, we have a little group that decide what to do. So we go to the T20 cricket matches in the summer. We invite local people to give talks, a bit like a WI does, but it's for blokes. Occasionally, we do allow clogettes to come along, such as when we go on a boat trip on the Trent and things like that. So actually, it's already given rise to another organisation in the community, so another example of community building. And in relation to the other, I'll just mention in terms of the role model question, the question about people's, what do we think older people can contribute? Our oldest walker, Muriel, I would say most people describe her as a role model of how to age disgracefully and successfully at the same time. People really look up to her because she's very moral. Her cup is always not half full, 3/4 full. There's nothing she can't do, and there's nothing she can't do for other people.
Do you want to answer the question? Transport first?
Okay. Hi, yes, in response to the question about the health and wellbeing strategy, this strategy that we're putting forward is very different to ones that have gone before it. Typically, they tend to focus on reducing a medical issue, so it might be something like reducing the impact of cardiovascular disease by a certain percentage in the city or something like that. What we're doing with this one is really looking at the wider determinants, so we're reaching out to try and work out what we can do around the environments that people live in, so that it does present a lot of challenges. We have linked through the strategy, we've actually linked into things like our local plan. So the local plan, I think it's been out for consultation, or maybe at the moment, we've actually fed some health aspects into that, which has been a first for that kind of area. So we're very involved with other departments in the council. They have inputted or been invited to input into the strategy so far as well, so it's been very much done in collaboration across sectors within our organisation, and also in collaboration with NHS partners as well, who we can't obviously leave out of the strategy. They're a major component of delivering. So that's how we've addressed it so far. So it is very much a collaborative document. And what we want to do is make it more of a collaborative document with other organisations to how we can input into it. Because the only way that we can make a difference and deliver parts of the strategy is through properly collaborative working, and that's what we're going to need to do. And I think there has to be a recognition of that, and quite how we do it with limited resources in every single way is going to be a challenge, but I think there's definitely potential that we can do it by working together.
Brilliant. And if we could invite our final two speakers to input on the strengths of older people.
Yes, I think probably the main strength of older people is that they're people. Everybody is the same. Older people bring experience, they bring skills, they bring enthusiasm, they bring ideas to their local communities. Harking back to what I said, older people told us as we were putting the review together that it's really important to have age-friendly rather than age-specific ways of working, and I would say that age-friendly and inclusive work is better for everybody. So really, it's about people.
And just, add in terms of certainly thinking about transport and travel, I think the opportunities and thinking also about the give and take as well. Far better in many ways if there's peer-to-peer people that can volunteer and support people, whether it's walking buddies or bus buddies going on the bus. It's in many ways there's some shortages out there of volunteers and capacity, but actually with the increasing elderly people, there's actually a larger population as well of volunteers, and having people that I say are alongside those people, that makes absolutely sense. So we would certainly see it as a fantastic opportunity really to get alongside.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, and thank you for your thoughtful questions and your considered responses. We're coming towards the end of the event, and I wanted to remind you that in your pack you've got one of these lovely forms, and we really do read these and we look at your responses and we plan our future events according to the things that we read here. I know that, Sarah, there is a slide that talks about the next event in the main presentation. And while that technology is sorting itself out, I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you to all our delightful speakers. And then to say that this is actually my first Lat Learning event, and hopefully not my last. And it wouldn't have been possible without the support of Ruth Rigby, who's poorly today, who, as you know, is Lat Lead Manager, to our colleagues, particularly to Rob Hunter on the board, our chair of board, who I'm going to invite up in a minute to round off and to share some of his thoughts and insights. To other colleagues in Vista who've attended, and to all the colleagues in LAT who've done a collective effort to make this event really enjoyable, hopefully for everyone. To all the staff at Highfield Centre, and we heard a lot about centre managers who praise their staff. And I know that both Fazana and Priya are brilliant at praising staff, and we're praising you and your team. And Dwight and his team, who've made this possible through their goodwill, really, for us as a charity. And it's fantastic that we've live streamed this to our millions of viewers around the world. So look out for yourself on Facebook later, because there will be a video posted as well. Particularly to Sarah for handling the technology. And we will try and get one of those remote control clickers, but I think they have minds of their own as well. So there's nothing to beat someone with their finger on the forward arrow. So thank you for that, Sarah. And particularly to Yolanta for carrying all the communications so brilliantly. Too many people really to name individually, but they're just like some highlights of people who've brought this event to you and made it possible. So yeah, do the form and tell us, give us your feedback. Tell us what worked well and what would be even better if. So in the last couple of minutes, I'm just going to invite Rob Hunter, our chair of Lat Board, to share with you his thoughts. Thank you.
Villa. Basically, I don't know if anybody has listened. Thanks, Sarah, for alerting me to the fact that on Radio 4 in the morning, somewhere, I don't know where it is, it's right the way through this week, there's Claudia Hammond talking about loneliness and different aspects. Yeah? They've done a 55,000 BBC survey, one of the largest surveys, not only in this country but also elsewhere, about loneliness. And one of the things that particularly interested me was when people were asked about what needs to change, the third item on their list was a change of mindset. Yeah? And they were talking about individuals changing their mindset. Yeah? And that sometimes we're talking about internalized depression, how older people see ourselves as a burden, as marginalized, as invisible. Yeah? And lacking in agency or power over our lives. And many thanks again to our speakers for developing a coherent frame around how we can support that process to happen. Thanks to Monica as well. And here, sorry, yes. The next one, at this moment, obviously Leicester is very lucky to be living in a community like we are, working in a community like we are. 66%, I think it is, of our beneficiaries are from black and minority ethnic groupings. We need to work out, we're constantly working out, what is common and what is cultural specific about both the challenges of loneliness and social isolation in older people and potentially effective interventions. So, and it won't be confined to the January one. We've got another 2, I think, scheduled for next year after January. So it'll be a constant theme of how do we work with minority ethnic groupings, but a particular focus of it in January. So many thanks again, speakers. Many thanks indeed for coming. Many thanks to Monica for hosting. Cheers.
Thanks, and we'll let you leave once we've had your evaluation forms. Thank you very much and safe journey home.